Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. We've got a full episode tonight, so we're going to be starting off with some trucker updates. We're also going to talk about the Ambassador Bridge protest that's going on. Then we're going to jump into your full course of pills. So we're going to go through the blue pill, the red pill, the black pill, the clown pill, and the white pill stories for today. I hope you guys are having a good Tuesday night so far. Smash the like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. And before we even jump into the trucker protest updates, I thought I'd just share with you guys, well, I think that Justin Trudeau's crisis-solving flowchart was recently just leaked. So I just thought I'd walk you guys through this real quick. So essentially, does someone disagree with you? Yes. Call them racist. Did that solve the problem? No. Call them racist again, a misogynist, plus a fringe minority. Did that solve the problem? No. Hide. Did the problem go away? No. Start over again at step one. So I can't necessarily verify the authenticity of this exact story, but just thought I'd share that with you guys. Off the top there, I may or may not have developed that in Microsoft Paint, but let's first get into some trucker story updates. So this is, as always, throughout these last 15 plus days, it's a very dynamic situation here. I've been trying to cover it to the best of my ability. And again, there's a lot of different moving puzzle pieces. So we're just going to hit a lot of the main points tonight. And the first one was there was today a spokesperson came out for the trucker protest and essentially just kind of updated on their perspective on what's going on. And I'll let them explain it to you.
Talk. Let's find a peaceful resolution to this. I want to go home. I want to go home, but I'm not. I'm not going until I'm no longer needed here. And based on all the support that we have from the people of Canada, I have an incredible amount of support and a lot of people that seem to want me here. And I'm not going home until the job is done. Okay? I am not calling for violence. I'm not expecting you to get into your vehicle, drive here, and create problems, create crimes. Okay, that's not what we're saying. Strength in numbers. We got sent here to send a message. The message isn't getting through. He's not getting it. And I apologize if I'm bashing the guy, but honestly, from my assessment, he's got a 22 caliber mind in a 357 world. Okay? Let's get at a table, for God's sakes. Enough hiding. I'm willing to sit at a table with the Conservatives and the NDP and the Bloc as a coalition. I'll sit with the Governor General. You put us at the.
And so just want to highlight here, I thought this was an interesting approach from the trucker convoy protesters and their leadership. Essentially, I think this will only add additional pressure to Justin Trudeau's position, particularly if we see the Conservatives, if we see the NDP willing to kind of sit down and listen, at least listen, right? Again, right now, the truckers aren't demanding that Trudeau immediately do everything that they want done. They literally want him to at least come to the table, sit down, and have a real conversation. And so far, Trudeau's made it blatantly clear he's got no intentions of doing so. And jumping over then to, again, as always, guys, links in the video description down below to everything we're going to talk about tonight. Again, I don't want this show to be the end of your researching process in regards to, figuring out what the hell's going on in the world. Just want it to be a springboard or a jumping off point for you guys. This next one is from Post Millennial. Breaking, Trudeau says Canada needs mandates to avoid further restrictions in response to calls for freedom. This is some circular logic if I ever heard it, but let's let our Prime Minister take it away.
I think one of the things we all understand is just how frustrated everyone is. We're all frustrated. We're all sick and tired of restrictions, of mandates, of having to make sacrifices, of not being able to do the things we love. It's been 2 years, and it's really, really tiring for all of us. This government has been focused every step of the way on following the best science, following the best public health advice to keep as many people safe as possible. And quite frankly, it's worked. We've seen the curves lower in Canada than elsewhere. We've seen lower death rates. We've seen quicker economic recovery because Canadians stepped up, because Canadians got vaccinated. And I can understand frustrations with mandates, but mandates are the way to avoid further restrictions.
So restrictions are how we avoid restrictions, essentially, is how I'll take that. And it'd be nice if the Prime Minister here would have shared some of his sources about how we had lower death rates than other countries and how our lockdowns essentially stack up, because outside of New Zealand and Australia, we're one of the most locked down countries in the world in regards to all the different restrictions we're experiencing here in Canada. And it is easy for both sides of this debate to cherry pick data from one or two countries. But for me, when I look towards Sweden, when I look towards Texas, Florida, or honestly, when you guys are just watching an NFL game, right, and there's 80,000 people in the stadium, how is it that those people are able to navigate COVID without having the same level of restrictions that we have in Canada? And yet they don't seem to be piling bodies up in their street either. Again, one thing that we've hit upon multiple times, if you guys jump back to some of our earlier episodes, is the fact that we've essentially done nothing to our infrastructure here in Canada in regards to hospitals. I know I keep promising it, and I've got all the tabs and information ready for it. But again, there's just been so much going on with the trucker protest that I haven't done a special episode yet on how Canada's healthcare system stacks up to other countries. But honestly, it doesn't look that great. And particularly when we consider the fact that we've had 2 years to essentially adjust what's going on in our healthcare system for this pandemic. And we've literally done nothing, right? We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on field hospitals, some of which still have not been delivered yet. And we've never used them. They've never seen one single patient yet. And again, it's this focus on rushing to headlines and just doling out money to insiders, SNC-Lavalin being one of them, that really frustrates me about our entire pandemic response. Continuing on, I want to highlight this. So really, this is a 10-minute clip here, guys. We're not going to listen to all of it, but I really encourage you to go and listen to the full clip. Again, link in the video description down below. Because this MP absolutely crushes it, Raquel Dancho. And she's essentially just speaking out to some of the frustrations that a lot of us Canadians are experiencing at this point in time about how a lot of the MPs right now are coming from a position of privilege where they never were in risk of losing their jobs, right? They're exempt from being forced into certain medical decisions. And again, they're making these massive, they're making either directly or indirectly through inaction these massive decisions that impact all of Canada. And honestly, at this point in time, especially when you hear the rhetoric coming out of the Liberal campaign or the Liberal Party in their camp, it's just so frustrating.
In Ottawa right now. And what I'd really like to see is a prime minister who calls for national unity. Last week, I spoke in the House about a lot of the division that we're seeing in the country between East versus West, rural versus urban, and particularly now during the pandemic. And we have heard so much trauma from our constituents. If there's any member in this House that does not believe Canadians have been through trauma these past 2 years, they clearly have not been doing their job and listening to their constituents, Mr. Speaker. It has been horrific, the things I've heard. We hear young children who are so depressed they don't want to eat. Eating disorders are through the roof. We've heard seniors and elderly in our care homes who opted for medical assistance and dying rather than live one more month through isolation in care homes. I have had widowed elderly women call and cry to me on the phone of how lonely they are and they don't want to go on. I've had grown men who've called me crying because their businesses are falling apart. We know divorces, abuse at home, alcohol dependency, drug dependency, all of these terrible things are up in our country because people are just trying to cope and are breaking down. So from that perspective, I don't really see what's going on across the country. It's all that surprising to me. It seems like an eruption of something that's been simmering of pain and trauma and frustration for 2 long years. And governments have not been listening to that pain and trauma, despite having rapid tests, vaccines, and all different types of tools and scientific knowledge. Governments have repeatedly relied on harsh lockdown measures and divisive mandates to control this virus. Meanwhile, we are seeing a prime minister who today got up in the House and again, othered Canadians who don't agree with him. This is a man for 6 years said diversity is our strength, but if anybody doesn't agree with everything he says, you're in the bad books and you don't get a chance to be heard. You don't have a right to be heard. And again, last week I brought to the floor of the House of Commons remarks he had said during that $600 million unnecessary election. He said so many times before he called that election, vaccines for all those who want them, vaccines for all those who want them. It's a choice. He said that repeatedly. He must have said it 1,000 times. And then within days of calling that election, he was yelling into a microphone at a Liberal rally that you have the right not to get vaccinated, but you don't have the right to sit next to someone who is. So to me, that doesn't really seem like someone. What did he say in his remarks today? He said, this is not a fight against one another. It's a fight against the virus. Those remarks, Mr. Speaker, suggest very different. Very different. So when it comes to an election and scoring political points and winning votes, the Prime Minister is very happy to divide Canadians and pit them against each other for their different personal health views. I, for one, am sick and tired of seeing politicians use this as an evil wedge tool to rip Canadian families apart. I can't tell you how much anger and tears I saw in the last election. That was 6 months ago. And now it's even worse. Neighbors won't talk to each other. I mean, Christmas family dinners. I mean, even if there wasn't lockdowns during Christmas, it's almost a nightmare to get families in the same room now. If there's one person who doesn't share their views, I mean, it's a nightmare. Colleagues at work. Again, last week I shared the story of a social worker, a young mom I met during the pandemic on her front step. She was sharing with me a story that she got Hero of the Year award last year. And this year, she put above and beyond to help people during the pandemic. Before there was vaccine, she stepped up, Hero of the Year for her job. And now she said no one would talk to her and she was going to get fired because of one personal health choice that she made. As much as others tried, there was no convincing this woman otherwise. And I don't know how public health officials and public officials get behind policies that do that to Canadians. We are one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. And this government continues to use it as a bludgeon to get people to submit to their policies. I've never thought that entering politics 2.5 years ago at a federal level, we would see a government that was so keen to divide Canadians on something so deeply personal. And as I said before, I'll say it again, I denounce any hateful and violent act outside. Whoever is up to no good, who's ever up to that kind of mischief and that kind of hateful rhetoric and those actions, shame on you. But what I'm seeing across the country is people mobilizing because their governments have not listened to them for 2 years. They've been experiencing trauma for 2 years, and no one is listening to them. So what choice do they have left? These people have all emailed their MPs. They've called them. They've been turned down by their MPs. I'm sure there's members of the public from the Prime Minister's writing, who've reached out, who have a different perspective on this, who've been traumatized and fired from their jobs for a personal health choice. There are millions of Canadians, millions of them, that have been deeply ostracized from society. And when you don't listen to those people, they mobilize. And we've seen protests across this country for over a century. And rightfully so, we have the right to peacefully protest. And I would ask the protesters outside that they do their best and stay vigilant to stay peaceful. But we are seeing other governments around the world step up with lower vaccination rates and say, look, we hear you, you've been traumatized, we're moving forward. Here's the deadline. This is the plan.
And so again, I encourage you guys, go watch the entire video, but it is very refreshing to finally hear some politicians speaking out and just calling out the hypocrisy, as well as just, talking about how other countries are actually handling this, and not just immediately looking towards the countries that are implementing the most draconian, the most tyrant-oriented policies. And then moving on, this is from CTV News. About 100 convoy trucks in downtown Ottawa have children living inside, police say. And this is just interesting to me because these same police that are saying they're so concerned for these children are also the ones that essentially are seizing the fuel that allows those cabs and some of the different shelters to be able to stay warm. So from the article, Ottawa police say about a quarter of vehicles parked in downtown Ottawa as part of the trucker protests have children living in them, and authorities are worried for their safety. Deputy Chief Steve Bell told reporters Tuesday that 25% more than 400 trucks occupying the downtown core had children living inside. It's something that greatly concerns us, he said, from the risk of carbon monoxide and fumes, the noise levels. We're concerned about cold. We're concerned about access to sanitation, the ability to shower. And again, it's very difficult for me to want to give them the benefit of the doubt on this, because if you're actually concerned for the children, you wouldn't be making it almost impossible or making it a crime, an accessory to mischief, I think is what they're framing it as right now. If you're bringing in fuel, if you're bringing in food, if you're bringing in blankets, but I understand that's literally what our politicians and the police are enforcing right now in the Ottawa area. And then again, as always, guys, if you guys want to get a full recap of what's going on, I encourage you to check out True North. They got one of the most comprehensive daily updates on what's going on in regards to the trucker protest. So again, link in the video description down below. But I want to highlight this. This is from The Guardian. And I'm not going to freak out on this article, but it's just honestly the lack of due diligence or research by this opinion piece is just embarrassing, in my opinion. The whole world should be worried by the siege of Ottawa. This is about much more than a few anti-vax truckers. So again, one, I hate the disingenuousness of framing this as anti-vax truckers rather than anti-mandate, right? Anti-lockdowns, anti-tyranny. And it's worth reading the entire article because it's all just filled with bullshit. But again, one thing that they really focus on and lean on in this article is all the language coming out from our politicians, right? So when they use the word occupation, they regurgitate here. When they talk about, fireworks being set off and desecrating war memorials. Again, now, to what degree were those war memorials really desecrated? It sounds like, to the best of my understanding, the worst thing that happened was someone urinated on it, which, again, completely inappropriate. That person should be charged, right? Again, we've got rules and laws already that allow you to charge that person. So that shouldn't really be a particular issue. But again, I've yet to hear that the police actually moved in and did that. And then the only other thing is a lady dancing on it, which again is distasteful. And if it turns out that breaks law, okay, go charge her. But that's hardly a desecration. There's a lot going on in the world right now. If you're not Canadian, then the protests in Ottawa might not be top of your list of things to worry about. But I'm afraid you should be worried. You should certainly be paying attention. What's unfolding in Ottawa is not a grassroots protest that has spontaneously erupted out of the frustration of local lorry drivers. Rather, it's an astroturfed movement, one that creates an impression of widespread grassroots support where little exists, funded by a global network of highly organized far-right groups and amplified by Facebook's misinformation machine. The drama may be centered in Canada, but what is unfolding has repercussions for all of us. I can't tell you guys how wrong this is. I literally watched every video that we've done on the trucker protests up until this point to get a firm understanding, but Facebook misinformation. So the same Facebook that deletes essentially any trucker protest, right? That's the misinformation you're talking about. When you're talking about later on, she refers to it being a small fringe minority because of Justin Trudeau, and that's used as a justification for how this doesn't have grassroots support. And yet we see this bringing up in every single province across Canada. We're seeing this at multiple border crossings, right? We're seeing people drive from BC to Ottawa. For those of you that have never made that drive, it's a really fucking long drive, particularly long in the winter, right? This isn't something that people just, I'll go out and have a fun weekend. These people are very committed to this because they understand the consequences of what's playing out right now in the cultural civil war that's occurring in Canada. I can't believe the idea that this is funded by a global network of far-right groups, right? And yet, where was this reporter's commentary maybe on some of the protests that occurred back in 2020? That's all I got to say about that. Continuing on, the post-millennial accusations against the truckers are vicious and baseless. And again, we've covered most of these baseless accusations, and we've debunked a lot of mainstream media information on previous episodes. But just wanted to highlight the first paragraph. I encourage you guys to go read the entire article, or if you're trying to maybe help friends or family members understand your perspective and why you support the evil dwellers that the Prime Minister makes them out to be. If they're not willing to watch my videos, well, this post will probably do a decent job. Police and politicians lack evidence when attacking the truckers. Accusations against the truckers are vicious and baseless. Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly does not mince words when attacking the truckers and ordinary Canadians who are now protesting peacefully in Ottawa. The truckers plan to stay until the charter rights and freedoms the politicians took away from Canadians 23 months ago are restored. Yeah. Then wanted to highlight Ottawa isn't just the Ottawa municipal or city government isn't satisfied with the 10-day injunction. They're not sad on honking horns. They're not satisfied with the fact that they've now got the police being more and more militarized and essentially trying to cut off supplies to the protesters. But Ottawa City Council wants a $1,000 fine for honking. Council protest influence proposals include bringing in more cops and eliminating the rule that allows vehicles to idle when it's cold outside. So the same people that say that they care about children are also saying, like, we don't even want you to be able to idle your vehicle to stay warm during these protests. That seems very reasonable. No, it absolutely doesn't seem very reasonable. This is completely asinine. And again, like, without even taking into consideration the fact that, Canada, we're in the middle of winter right now. It's really cold in areas like Ottawa, but across the country, like where I live, it's usually minus 20 or worse, it seems like, this time of year. It's important to understand that, like, they're literally trying everything in their hat of tricks in order to try and disincentivize these truckers. And the fact that the truckers are still committed to this, to me, more than proves that this is a grassroots movement, that these are genuine individuals that are committed to this. If these were paid activists, right? If these were astroturfed activists, I don't think that they'd be committed to this level. I don't think we'd see them popping up all across the country. And then from Reuters, U.S.-Canada border crossing blocked by truckers fighting COVID restrictions. So essentially, I want to do a little highlight on what's going on with the Ambassador Bridge. So jumping over to the AP, the Associated Press, COVID-19 protests threaten border trade between Canada and the U.S. Ottawa, Ontario, Canadian lawmakers expressed increasing worry Tuesday about the economic effects of disruptive demonstrations after the busiest border crossing between the U.S. and Canada became partially blocked by truckers protesting vaccine mandates and other COVID-19 restrictions. Canadian Transport Minister Omar Algebra said such blockades will have serious implications on the economy and supply chains. I've already heard from automakers and food grocers. This is really a serious cause for concern, he said in Ottawa, the capital. And yet, if this is such a serious cause for concern, why is Justin Trudeau not even willing to essentially accept that this exists, right? Accepts that this is more than a fringe minority. And then continuing down the Ambassador Bridge, this is from the Post-Millennial. North America's busiest crossing blocked by freedom protesters for second day. So again, if you guys want to get a little bit less of a biased perspective or a counter bias, at least to the mainstream media's bias, I encourage you to check out the Post-Millennial. From Rebel News, Windsor-Detroit border crossing blockaded by truckers protesting restrictions. Speaking to the Detroit Free Press, Greg Ward, the president of Detroit Windsor Truck Ferry, said that the bridge closing is unprecedented, and that the last time the bridge closed for a protest was in 1990. And then finally, just wanted to highlight this from Zero Hedge. So blockade at U.S.-Canada border could paralyze Detroit auto industry in 2 days. So More than 48 hours into protesters blocking the Ambassador Bridge that connects Windsor, Ontario with Detroit, there are new warnings the auto industry might come to a screeching halt this week. Basically, if there's a shutdown of transportation routes, the auto industry comes to a screeching halt in about 2 days. Robert Waldeboer, executive chairman of Martin Ray International Inc., said Tuesday on BNN Bloomberg Television. Martin Ray is a major auto parts manufacturer based in Vaughan, Ontario. It manufactures engine blocks, transmission cases, housing, suspensions, chassis components, and body paneling for automotive companies in Detroit. We have 38 trucks cross at the Detroit border per day and 16 in Sarnia. Wildeboer said since protesters have shuttered the border crossings, it appears Martin Ray's ability to cross into Detroit has become challenging. And I'm just kind of highlighting what's going on here. I'm not saying whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but certainly it does appear like it's going to have real consequences to the economy. And again, it would just be really nice if Justin Trudeau would come out and be a little bit more outspoken about everything that's going on. But let's switch gears here now and get into our first blue pill story of the day. So if you guys didn't see this, there's actually starting to be some voicing of concerns coming out of Liberal MPs. And understand that while the Conservative Party, like any political party, doesn't like when their members speak out against the main narrative or the leader, the Liberal Party is much more focused on whipping their MPs into a cohesive narrative. And so for Joel Lightbound to come out and actually speak his mind and say that he doesn't like what's going on here, this is actually a really big deal. This is from Maclean's. So the Joel Lightbound crisis in the Liberal Party. Paul Wells, the MP's astonishing criticism of Liberal policy on COVID restrictions is the most serious threat to Trudeau's leadership since Jane Philpott quit the federal cabinet. And it is interesting for the last, week or two, really since the trucker protests started gaining some momentum here in Canada, there's been a lot of, probably right-leaning Twitter or freedom-oriented Twitter talking about how this is only going to end in Trudeau's resignation. I'm starting to believe that more and more as this situation compounds. I can't see his ego allowing him to do an about face or a 180 pivot in regards to his position on the truckers, as well as his position on mandates, lockdowns, and essentially demanding all Canadians comply to his vaccine desires. But it is interesting. We'll see how this all plays out. But from the article, here's Dylan McGuire, Operations and Tour Assistant to the Minister of Housing, Diversity and Inclusion. That's Ahmed Hussein. I learned calling for Joel Lightbound to be removed from the Liberal caucus as swiftly as possible. I haven't met McGuire, and my interactions with Lightbound have been limited, but young staffers tweet hints at the very large difficulty Lightbound now presents to the Liberal Party of Canada. You're forgiven for not knowing Lightbound. He's the Liberal member for Quebec City riding of Louis Herbert, and his astonishing Tuesday morning news conference was a detailed prosecution not only of the Liberal policy on COVID-related restrictions, but of Liberal manner of governing over at least the last several months. I think it's time we stop dividing the population, he said, and not everyone can earn a living on a MacBook at a cottage. I mean, he's criticizing the government's timetable on healthcare transfers. Whatever a backbench MP's knitting is supposed to be these days, Lightbound is spectacularly not sticking to it. And obviously, this is a very biased approach, right? When they're talking about his astonishing criticism of the Liberal Party, I would argue instead of astonishing, this is more just common sense discussions, right? But I guess these days that is astonishing to hear a politician use common sense. I'm torn here. On the one hand, it was disappointing that so many questions at Lightbound's news conference were about the very caucus politics I lead with here, instead of about the substance of his argument. On the other hand, I do believe Lightbound's sortie today constitutes the most serious threat to Justin Trudeau's leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada since Jane Philpott quit the federal cabinet. And now again, well, I'm beginning to think more and more this is probably going to end in Justin Trudeau stepping down. Maybe it'll be for medical reasons, family reasons, or some other, he's going to focus on charity or something like that. That isn't necessarily just a resounding win, in my opinion, as we covered in that special WEF Canada edition that I did, I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago now, but essentially understand that the Deputy Prime Minister, Freeland, she's very deep into the World Economic Forum. She sits on its board. She actually wrote a book back in 2012 called Plutocrats, the rise of the super rich and, I forget what the byline is. But anyways, I ordered it. It's actually a really hard book to find here in Canada. But right after she wrote that book, she talked about how she was criticized and pushed out of the World Economic Forum dinner parties and things of that nature. Once she got into politics, she did a hard pivot and doubled down on becoming a World Economic Forum member. And again, we talked about how Klaus Schwab back in 2017 bragged that he had penetrated more than 50% of the Liberal cabinet here in Canadian federal politics. Continuing on, this is from CBC News. Liberal MP Joel Lightbound says his party's COVID policy stigmatizes and divides people. Again, this shouldn't be revolutionary. And it's shocking to me to see how a lot of the mainstream media is interpreting this like, oh my gosh, how could he say these things? When it's like, no, literally, that's what your prime minister, what the leader of the federal Liberal Party has been doing ever since he started running the election last year and once he finished it. Pointing to more than a dozen developed countries that have started to do away with restrictions already, Lightbound said Tuesday it's reasonable to rethink Canada's COVID-19 approach as it becomes increasingly clear that the world will be dealing with this virus for years to come. Lightbound said people who question existing policies should not be demonized by their prime minister. I can't help but notice with regret that both the tone and the policies of my government have changed drastically since the last election campaign. It went from a more positive approach to one that stigmatizes and divides people, Lightbound said. And again, I don't know a lot about Lightbound, but I definitely respect him coming out and speaking at this point in time. At the same time, I hope that we see other Liberals grow a backbone and start speaking the truth and just calling out the hypocrisy they're seeing. Now, switching gears here on the Blue Pill, this is from National Newswatch. CEO of Canada's largest trucking company says vaccine mandates not an issue at all. So Montreal, the chief executive of TFI International Inc. says its operations are virtually untouched by the recent vaccine mandate for truckers crossing the U.S.-Canada border. So just wanted to kind of highlight that because it is one of the articles making the rounds in the Blue Pill media. Now what I wanted to highlight here is Ottawa increases warnings about Ukraine, urges Canadians to leave over Russia threat. And now, if you guys have been following this to any extent, literally the Ukraine government itself seems to be downplaying what a lot of its NATO allies are really beating the war drums on. So French President Emmanuel Macron said Tuesday that Russian President Vladimir Putin told him he would not further escalate the Ukraine crisis during 5 hours of talks in the Kremlin a day earlier. The Kremlin wants guarantees from the West that NATO will not accept Ukraine and other former Soviet nations as members, that it halt weapon deployments there and roll back its forces from Eastern Europe. And again, if you guys aren't familiar with, originally NATO and the Warsaw Pact, understand that there's been multiple times NATO and the American government in particular has made promises to Russia about not going into the Ukraine, about not continuing to creep up on the western borders of Russia. And we just continuously seem to break those promises. Now, again, there's always a justification or a reason for it from NATO's perspective, but it is important to understand. And if you guys didn't see this clip, this is from CNS News, but it was making the rounds on a lot of different social media sites. This is worth listening to. And it's just wild. Literally right now, it feels like, I guess maybe just because I'm older, but this feels like the weapons of mass destruction that we heard about that originally caused us to go to war with Iraq back in 2004 and 2005, right after 9/11. And it's wild to see the hubris coming from the American government and state agencies in regards to, why do you want us to show you proof? You should just believe us. If we tell you something, it's fact. But again, isn't this the same government administration that told us that we didn't have to worry about Afghanistan falling, that the Taliban wouldn't seize everything? And then like a day later, they were like, well, of course, it was going to happen eventually. And it's like, well, you literally told us the day before it wasn't.
It's destructive and destabilizing disinformation campaign to de-escalate tensions and to engage in diplomacy and dialogue for a peaceful solution. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, well, that's quite a mouthful there. So you said actions such as these suggest otherwise, suggest meaning that they suggest they're not interested in talks and they're going to go ahead with some kind of what action are you talking about?
One, the actions I've just pointed to. The fact that Russia continues to engage in disinformation campaigns.
You made an allegation that they might do that. Have they actually done it?
What we know, Matt, is what I have just said, that they have engaged in this activity in this planning activity. But let me because obviously this is not the first time we've made these reports public. You'll remember that just a few weeks ago.
I'm sorry, made what report public?
If you let me finish, I will tell you what report we made public. We told you a few weeks ago that we have information indicating Russia also has already prepositioned a group of operatives to conduct a false flag operation in eastern Ukraine. So that, Matt, to your question, is an action that Russia has already taken.
It's an action that you say that they have taken, but you have shown no evidence to confirm that. And I'm going to get to the next question here, which is, what is the evidence that they, I mean, this is like crisis actors, really? This is like Alex Jones territory you're getting into now. What evidence do you have to support the idea that there is some propaganda film in the making?
Matt, this is derived from information known to the U.S. government, intelligence information that we have declassified. I think you know.
Okay, well, where is it? Where is this information?
It is intelligence information that we have declassified.
Well, where is it? Where's the declassified information?
I just delivered it.
No, you made a series of allegations and statements.
Would you like us to print out the topper? Because you will see a transcript of this briefing that you can print out for yourself.
That's not evidence, Ned. That's you saying it. That's not evidence. I'm sorry.
What would you like, Matt?
You can see in that moment he realizes that his circular logic isn't going to work on this reporter, and goddamn, it's nice to see a reporter calling out the U.S. administration on like, hey, maybe you should show us some evidence before we go to war. And they're like, we told you that we need to go to war because reasons. And he's like, do you mind sharing those reasons and some evidence behind those reasons?
I would like to see some proof that you you can show that
Matt, you have
shows that the Russians are doing this. Ned, I've been doing this for a long time.
I know, that was my point. You have been doing this for quite a while. You know that when we declassify intelligence information, we do so in a means we do so with an eye to protecting sources and methods.
Is not going to fall.
And again, he's talking over the reporter there, but he says, I remember weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I remember Kabul not going to fall. And yeah, at this point in time, why should we just take the U.S. government at face value whenever they tell us that someone else is bad and U.S. is good? No, we would like some evidence. It's not too much to actually ask if you want us to send people over to go start a hot conflict against Russia. Continuing on down the blue pill storyline here, moving on from Ukraine. This is from CTV News. Ontario to disclose names of educators involved in sexual abuse, other serious criminal investigations. And I guess I just want to say, I guess this is good, but it's also shocking to me that this wasn't already the case. And again, I encourage you guys to go read all of it, but parents and guardians in Ontario will now be able to know if their student's teacher has been involved in a sexual abuse investigation, the provincial government announced on Tuesday. These changes are some of the ways we're making and taking action to make the education profession more accountable to families, Education Minister Stephen Lisi said at a news conference in Maple. We believe parents have a right to know if an educator is charged or convicted of a serious crime because we take zero tolerance on this, Lisi added. Okay, yeah, I'm glad. I'm literally just flabbergasted that we didn't already have this on the books. Were we literally protecting people that abuse children and were charged of serious crimes if they were teachers? And later on in the article, it refers to the fact that this also is going to retroactively apply. So if someone somehow was reinstated as a teacher, now it'll be disclosed and they'll essentially be forced out of teaching. Continuing on the blue pill, if you guys somehow didn't see it, Pierre Poilievre announced that he's going to be running for Canadian Prime Minister. And now, again, this is kind of interesting how he framed it. He didn't say he was going to be running for the leadership of the Conservative Party, but he'd be running for Prime Minister. And I can't help but think that on purpose. Now, maybe it's just a play up to the international news agencies that might be a little bit less excited about someone announcing they were running for Conservative leadership. Maybe it's maybe there's a different reason or logic behind it, but it was just interesting, I think, the way he framed it. And one of the things I was going to point out, but literally this just came out right before I was about to go live, I was going to call out Pierre Poilievre for essentially not speaking out about what's going on with the mandates with the truckers. Again, he's shown some mild support for them, but he hasn't spoken out against the new draconian rules that essentially the state of emergency, they're trying to cut off supplies from the Ottawa protesters and things of that nature. And he literally just had this tweet come out. So the tweet is, breaking, freedom is winning. Provinces are lifting restrictions and vaccine passports, and Liberal MP Joel Lightbound has condemned Trudeau for his nasty and controlling rules. Sign my petition to end mandates, passports, and restrictions. So honestly, I'm kind of two minds on this. One, I'm glad to see it happen, so I'm not complaining about it. But I can't help but feel that Pierre is very much a politician in this regards, and he only did this when it was politically expedient and when he thought that it was in his own personal best interest. Had a Liberal MP not spoken out, if there wasn't this disintegration of Aaron O'Toole's leadership in the Conservative Party, maybe I'm just too black-pilled, guys, but I honestly doubt Pierre would be speaking out and starting this this campaign, right? I don't know. Let me know. Do you think that I need to give him more the benefit of the doubt? At this point in time, I think the only thing we can hope from Pierre is that he's slightly better than probably any other politician that would be running for prime minister other than Max from the PPC. And maybe he'll bring, financial fiduciary intelligence to our leadership, right? He seems to understand that budgets don't just magically bounce themselves. Now, I know a lot of Bitcoin Twitter secretly believes that he is that he's actually orange pilled, and he's going to push hard on the Bitcoin front here in Canada. If that ends up being true, I'll probably forgive him of any and all other mistakes, because that would be wonderful to see play out in Canada. But right now, I don't see enough evidence. Yes, he's quoted, from the Bitcoin Standard and some of his speeches in Parliament and things of that nature. But again, I think he is very calculating in how he approaches these things. And I think you guys know my general opinion on just about all politicians. So we'll move on from blue pills, get into the red pill here. So the first thing I want to hit upon here is critical race theory. And I understand probably a lot of parents don't feel like they've got the time or the energy to fully understand the subject matter. You have to. You really have a duty to understand what's being taught to your children and how this discussion is being framed. It's not just about what critical race theory is. It's also the praxis, right? How they're actually practicing it when it comes to implementing some of the ideology. And I understand a lot of people just want to assume that there's good intentions behind this. And so because there's good intentions, then, we should be giving a wide berth to these concepts and the idea of implementing this in Canadian schools. This is from the National Post. How critical race theory sparked controversy in the U.S. and influenced Canadian education. I'm just going to hit on a couple little points here, and then we're going to jump over to an actual presentation that was put together for teachers of the Toronto District School Board, I believe it was. So one thing you need to understand is a key component here is race is a made-up social construct to uphold European and white standards, states the guideline, and not an actual biological fact. Now, those that want to kind of point out that critical theories, more Marxist lineage, right, and the fact that it's really focused on just dividing people up and playing them against each other, well, they talk about how race is a made-up social construct. They're also viewing everything through the lens of race, which is just fascinating in my opinion. So again, I encourage you guys, go read the entire article and don't let this be the end of your understanding. This is one of the lessons that are being rolled out here for grade 2 and grade 3s. Again, there's a link in the video description down below from National Post. But learn, disrupt, rebuild is kind of their motto. Feels kind of like build back better in a way. But what I want to highlight here was there's an actual presentation. I've got it linked in the video description down below that breaks out a lot of the points that they're trying to indoctrinate teachers with in order to indoctrinate children. And a couple things I want to bring up: colorblindness, racism. Colorblindness is the racial ideology that persists. The best way to end discrimination is by treating individuals as equally as possible without regard to race, culture, or ethnicity. So what's fascinating there is they both say race doesn't exist and it's a made-up social construct, but also if you want to be colorblind and just treat everyone equally, then you're actually racist. And again, they talk about things like unconscious bias, implicit bias, privilege, right? So Unearned freedoms, rights, and benefits, access and or opportunities that provide unfair advantages for members of the dominant groups in society because privileges are granted by mere affiliation with the dominant groups. Some people are not always aware of the privileges they have. Examples include cisgender privilege, straight privilege, male privilege, settler privilege, white privilege. So I'm pretty sure I got the privilege bingo there on all fronts. But first of all, I just want to think about this. Unearned freedoms. Freedoms aren't earned. They're inherent as far as I'm concerned. You don't have to earn your freedoms. And I don't need to earn my freedoms. You don't need to earn your freedoms. It doesn't matter your race, your religion, your creed. It's very concerning about where, if you go down the rabbit hole here, guys, this easily could have been a black pill story, but I just already had a bunch of black pill stories. But I'll encourage you guys to really look into this further because it's important to understand. And it feels like a complete reversal of a lot of the things that I think we grew up with, or at least people my age or generation grew up. You know, the idea that color does not exist, so we don't need to talk about it. Well, again, the idea that you're telling us that race doesn't exist, but also racism is everywhere is interesting to say the least. But again, I encourage you guys, dive deep into this, get a firm understanding. And hey, if you want your children taught that, awesome. You know, you do you and you raise your children how you believe best. But for parents that are maybe concerned about this, right? Parents that maybe see some of the stuff that's going on in the United States, where literally you've got white children standing up and having to ask forgiveness from their peers, their fellow students who are visible minorities or BIPOCs or whatever terminology or label you want to apply to them. Again, those are their labels. The people from critical race theory, they're not my labels, because I don't see the evil that is color blindness. They're just wanting to treat everyone equally, regardless of their race. Again, that doesn't mean to say that also doesn't mean that the idea of like concepts like systemic racism or that certain institutions can be racist or certain approaches to it's a complex situation, I guess is what I'm saying. Again, I'm not trying to tell you guys how to think, but I'm telling you, you need to be aware of this. Because 5-10 years from now, there's going to be serious consequences if this is allowed just completely unfettered into the education system, particularly in grade 2 and grade 3 and things of that nature. And again, between the critical race theory and the sexualization of minors that we see going on in the United States education curriculums in the more blue states, that should be of concern for all Canadians, particularly those of you that live in large urban centers, right? Understand that those are usually the areas they're more progressive, they're more left-leaning. And again, you may have the best absolute intentions behind what you want to implement in regards to critical race theory or things of that. But what is the actual praxis? What's the actual rollout of this teaching look like, right? And that's where really my spidey senses start to tingle. Continuing on, this is from the Wall Street Journal. So why colleges don't care about free speech? And again, this should concern all of us. Georgetown University's law school violated its own speech policy last week when it placed Ilya Shapiro, a newly hired administrator, on leave over a tweet that offended some students. Why do universities make grandiloquent commitments to freedom of speech, then fail to honor them? It isn't so much an issue of ideology as a problem of incentives. Georgetown's policy states that speech may not be suppressed because the ideas put forth are thought by some or even by most members of the university community to be offensive, unwise, immoral, or ill-conceived. Yet, that's what happened when Mr. Shapiro tweeted that the candidate he viewed as objectively most qualified for the Supreme Court, alas, doesn't fit the latest intersectionality hierarchy, so we'll get lesser black woman. The dean of Georgetown Law, William Trenor, announced that Mr. Shapiro's comment was at odds with everything we stand for at Georgetown Law and ordered an investigation into whether he violated our policies and expectations on professional conduct, non-discrimination, and anti-harassment. Regardless of Mr. Trenor's political views, he has every reason to do this. University administrators get no reward for upholding abstract principles. Their incentive is to quell on-campus outrage and bad press as quickly as possible. Success is widely praised, but there is no punishment for failing to uphold the university's commitment to free speech. Again, it's important to understand that those that want to control speech, they want to control you. Right? They want to control literally your thoughts. They want to control your actions. And one of the first things they focus on is controlling the language. For those that don't agree or don't believe this, maybe you just need to go and refresh yourself in regards to 1984, right? But I hold free speech as paramount to individual liberty and sovereignty. And so seeing these things play out in real time really is concerning, in my opinion. Continuing on, post-millennial, Ottawa police not subject to vaccine mandates, but truckers they're arresting are. Ottawa police officers are given the option to undergo daily rapid COVID tests if they choose not to get vaccinated, a luxury that working-class Canadian truckers don't have. And so if you guys want to learn more, hit the link in the video description down below. I encourage you to get better understanding. Now, this is from True North, and this is Levy, anti-Semitism only an issue when it fits the left-wing agenda. This is something we brought up multiple times on the show already, but when they had the anti-hate spokesperson come out and say that this was the worst demonstration of Nazism in Canada's history, of anti-Semitism in Canada's history, that's complete bullshit. Right. And I broke down for you literally how you can look at some of the pro-Palestinian protests and the language they use, how in the past, literally Jewish people in Toronto have been attacked. Right. This isn't to make out all pro-Palestinian people as evil or anti-Semitic, but understand that there's at least a fringe minority in that movement that absolutely is. And they're much more vocal than anything we've seen at the trucker protest up until this point in time. But the politicians, the administration, the police, the left in general, they really have no desire to call out that hypocrisy. They're only focused on trying to find edge case scenarios in regards to the trucker protest. From this article, having made it one of my missions to expose anti-Semitism, which in the current era is often dressed up in the guise of anti-Zionism or hatred of the Jewish state, I paid particular attention to the messages of fear expressed by members of Canada's Jewish community. That was until I realized many of the tweets were from ardent leftists whose heads were exploding over the protests themselves. Like the legacy media, many of them seemed determined to malign the truckers and their message, no matter how contrary the evidence and no matter how transparent the leftist agenda was. The most interesting thing about all of it was the sheer ignorance of the tweeters about the important fact. Benjamin Ditcher, co-organizer of the Freedom Convoy, is Jewish. And again, they bring up examples. We discussed this one example already about how this individual wasn't part of the trucker protest. But here at the end, I replied to Back. And so Back is an individual that essentially was using that individual protester who wasn't part of the protest or the anti-protest or the counter-protest in Toronto, but literally was a man alone unto himself. He was using that as an example of the anti-Semitism of the trucker protesters in Toronto over this weekend. I replied to Back, telling him he might want to follow me to several of the highly anti-Semitic protests I've covered in Toronto in the past few years, including El Quds, the Day of Jew Hatred, regular protests in front of the Israeli consulate on Bloor Street West, and a recent protest that filled the Yonge and Bloor intersection with vitriolic anti-Jewish diatribe. I was at all of them, and I had to listen to anti-Israeli protests single me out for being there. Evidently, though, Back didn't much like me speaking the truth. He blocked me with a flourish, tweeting he found nothing more satisfying than doing so. And that's an important thing just about this entire discussion that we're having here playing out in Canada. One side wants to immediately cancel and silence the other side. And the other side of this discussion, they want their freedoms. They want open discussions, right? They want the ability to make their own decisions. And it's very obvious how those sides line up against each other, in my opinion. Now, one more red pill story that I wanted to hit here with you guys. CTF petitions against home equity tax before it's too late. So we've covered this in the past about how CMHC recently did a study that they spent $250,000 on about home equity. And afterwards, once there was political flack being thrown at them and the Liberals, everyone came out and said, oh, no, you misunderstood the study. We don't actually want to tax homeowners' equity. Guys, they absolutely do, regardless of what they tell you, right? The only reason that they've now started tracking on tax returns, individuals' sales and profits made on their principal residence is down the road. They're going to use that information against you. I've been literally harping on this since it rolled out. I think it was back in 2017 or 2018. Like, go back to some of my old Canadian real estate channel videos, but on the subject matter. But this is a big deal. And if you don't consistently make your voice heard that we're not okay with this, eventually we're going to see a administration here in Canada roll this out, and it will absolutely be to the detriment of all Canadian homeowners. Another red pill. This is from MSN News. So supermarkets, theft rises. Shoplifters more aggressive, warns grocery industry. So industry experts say meat is the #1 stolen item, followed by cheese and over-the-counter medicine. Liquor stores are also reporting an increase in theft since the onset of the pandemic. It's unclear whether the uptick in shoplifting is due to escalating inflation and food insecurity, a growing resale market for stolen goods, or other factors. Now, one thing that's interesting, I haven't even heard that there was a growing resale market for stolen goods. Is this something that you guys have seen talked about in the news previously? Is this something that you're personally experiencing? Because this is the first I've really seen it in the mainstream media, but maybe I just overlooked it in previous stories. But experts say thefts have become more brazen in recent months, and customers wearing face masks make it more difficult to identify people. And one of the reasons I want to highlight this is because if you guys haven't been paying attention to what's going on in California, San Francisco now, where they essentially don't charge anyone that steals less than $900 worth of merchandise, there's pockets of it that are literally becoming like shopping, like a shoplifter war zones, where you're seeing businesses go out of business because they literally can't deal with the volume of theft, right? Or shrinkage, as we call it, or as like accountants or people in the industry call it. It is wild to see this playing out in real time, and I hope that we can all agree we don't want to see this play out in Canada. And so this is definitely a concerning direction we're headed in. Now, let's get into a black pill story. This is from the Washington Examiner. Indiana Attorney General says Black Lives Matter's House of Cards starting to fall amid financial questions. And if you guys haven't seen this playing out, there seems to be a lot of issues going on with the Black Lives Matter protest that back in 2020 raised over $60 million, and where that money went, how it was used, a lot of things. So Indiana's Attorney General criticized Black Lives Matters, calling it a house of cards and making his state the latest to raise questions about the charity's finances. Todd Rokita told the Washington Examiner the group that took in tens of millions of dollars amid the racial protests and riots of 2020 and now won't answer questions about its finances fits a common and disturbing pattern. It appears that the house of cards may be falling, and this happens eventually with nearly every scam, scheme, or illegal enterprise. Rokita, a Republican, said in an exclusive interview, "I see patterns that scams kind of universally take. Failure to provide board members, failure to provide even executive directors, failure to make your filings available. It all leads to suspicion." Yep, as an accountant, I agree with that analysis. BLM reported in February 2021 that it closed out 2020 with $60 million in its coffers, but the charity has had no known leader in charge of its bankroll since its co-founder, Patrice Cullors, resigned in May. Amid scrutiny of her personal finances, the group also provided the wrong address on previous tax forms submitted to the IRS, and one of BLM's board members recently took steps to conceal his role with the charity on his social media profiles. A Washington Examiner investigation previously found. California and Washington recently instructed Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, the charity that represents the national BLM movement, to cease soliciting funds from residents of their state until the group gives them information about its 2020 finances. So again, if you guys want, link in the video description down below to that. But let's move on. This is from Zero Hedge. So Pfizer quietly adds language warning that unfavorable preclinical, clinical, or safety data may impact business. And so one of the reasons I want to highlight this here, without going too deep down the black pill or rabbit holes on different conspiracy theories, one of the things that stood out to me back in 2021 when the vaccines were being rolled out is we started to see some financial guidance from Chinese entities talking about things like how they expected lower birth rates. So there was a Chinese formula, like baby formula company that talked about how going into late 2021 and 2022 expected lower sales due to lower birth rates. And it essentially implied that that was in relation to the vaccines. Now, at that point in time, that was dismissed by pretty much everyone in the mainstream media as a conspiracy theory, as misreading the information. You know, as time's gone on, it seems like there are certain, impacts to a woman's menstrual cycle in regards to becoming vaccinated. Again, I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit hole and make your own decision on that. But let's jump into this newest part from Pfizer. So now Pfizer, which just forecast $54 billion in COVID-related sales in 2020, appears to be anticipating some bad news, as evidenced by several red line changes in their Q4 earnings releases. And just side notes here, it's fascinating to me how sometimes the truth comes out through these financial reportings. As Rubicon Capital's Kelly Brown notes on Twitter, the changes center around disclosures of unfavorable safety data. For example, in Q4, they added, or further information regarding the quality of preclinical, clinical, or safety data, including by audit or inspection. More from Brown, who notes the advisor is now highlighting concerns about clinical data integrity. And reminder, we actually covered this in previous stories where it broke that, I forget the individual, but he's made a habit of pointing out large corporations' misdeeds, and he published a article in Science magazine, I believe, essentially pointed out, again, you guys will have to jump back into a previous video because my memory is not doing me justice here, but essentially Kelly Brown breaks out all the changes in their financial disclosures. I encourage you guys, if you're curious, spend some time going down this rabbit hole. Definitely interesting. And now this is another one from Zero Hedge, courtesy of the Mises Institute. And the White House is essentially telling us, don't remember the past. Just remember what we're telling you right now. So the White House now says it never really wanted lockdowns. So this is just too wild to even discuss. So you guys can go read it for yourself. But it's hilarious to see Jen essentially do this about face. The only good I can really pull from this is it seems like everyone's trying to distance themselves now, except for Canada's Justin Trudeau, from mandates, from lockdowns, from the crazy COVID policies we've seen up until this point in time. Now, moving on from the black pill to a couple of clown pill stories. This one, again, is from Zero Hedge. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but the largest financial seizure ever. Department of Justice recovers billions in Bitcoin from 2016 Bitfinex hack, couple arrested. So, again, I encourage you guys to go find out the entire thing. But it turns out the way they were able to recover the actual stolen Bitcoin was that these masterminds, these hackers, stored their keys on Google Drive. So let this be a lesson to all of us. Do not store your keys on Dropbox, on Google Drive. Don't ever put them on the internet. Don't ever put them on a computer for that matter. Literally, they should never see the light of day outside of your own eyes. And you know what? Honestly, I'm just disappointed in these hackers for not understanding like rule number 1 of Bitcoin, which is, not your keys, not your coin, or if you share your keys with anyone, it's also not your coin. Second pill or clown pill story I want to share with you guys. This is from National Post. Senior Ontario Liberal was on sunny holiday as he told candidates to cancel vacations. So we're just going to hit this quick, but the order came down before Christmas from Ontario Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca that anyone hoping to run as a candidate in the upcoming provincial election would be prohibited from traveling out of country for sunny winter getaways, no exceptions. But some had already made plans to travel and they were in a bind. One candidate said she called the Ontario Liberals chief returning officer, Milton Chan, in December to explain that she had already purchased expensive non-refundable tickets. Unbeknownst to her at the time, Chan was on his own sunny vacation at the time. Still, he informed her that the edict was clear: forget the vacation or forget about being a Liberal Party candidate. Now, obviously, in politics, optics are important. So I understand the logic or the logical framework that the provincial Liberals would have used in order to come to this conclusion. But honestly, I think this just looks as bad. And like, I don't know, anyone that votes for the provincial Liberal Party, you get what you deserve. National News Watch. So moving on to some white pill stories now. It definitely seems like a bunch of Canadian politicians are finally edging towards loosening up in regards to mandates, lockdowns, mask policies, and all that stuff. Jason Kenney was supposed to be doing an announcement right when we started this live, so I don't know what he came out and said. I suspect that he's also loosening things. But Saskatchewan ending COVID-19 passport, lifting mask requirements. And so Regina, Saskatchewan is lifting all of its pandemic public health orders in a phased approach that is to begin Monday with the removal of its COVID-19 vaccine passport policy. At the end of the month, it also plans to end its indoor mask mandate and the requirement for people to self-isolate if they test positive for the virus. Premier Scott Moe said Tuesday that providing proof of vaccination to enter businesses, including restaurants, has helped to fight the infection spread, but it also created deep divisions in the province and affect two classes of citizens, he said. The benefits of this policy no longer outweigh the costs, said Moe, who added people should be able to choose whether to get vaccinated. I agree that politicians are coming to the conclusion now that that essentially the mental math here doesn't make sense to continue with the mandates. But understand that without the trucker protest, without the mass uprising that we've seen here in Canada, without just the average Canadian speaking out and showing with their actions how frustrated they are with the administration, both at the municipal, federal, or provincial and federal levels, I honestly don't think we'd see Pierre Poilievre stepping up the way we have. I don't think we'd see a lot of conservative MPs speaking out the way we did. I don't think we would have seen the Liberal MPs speak out today, and I don't think we'd see the premiers rushing to drop these mandates. Because honestly, at this point in time, like Jordan Peterson's talked about this multiple times on his podcast, so I encourage you guys to go follow and listen to some of his recent discussions. But essentially, like, the way he's been told by insiders in politics, and this passes the sniff test, at least for me, is that most of these politicians literally just look at polls and they're like, what's the majority want? Okay, we'll do that. And so literally what you're seeing is like a group of lemmings deciding based upon public opinion polls what happens next. And again, understand that these polls maybe aren't always accurate, that maybe you can manipulate the outcome or the way these questions are framed in order to impact individuals. And then when you've also got the mainstream media, sorry, this is supposed to be a white pill story, but when you've got the mainstream media also pushing out fear porn nonstop, it's very easy to see how the average Canadian for the last 2 years has been brainwashed and essentially driven to this point. But let's continue down the white pill. This is a pure white pill story, I promise you guys. So this was absolutely amazing in my opinion. I set up a Bitcoin section in my school's library. Here's why I think Bitcoin is important and worthwhile for Gen Z to learn about. And honestly, this is one of my favorite photos I've seen on the internet in a while. If you guys haven't read these books, I encourage you to go get yourself some copies. But I also just love the fact that this is actually in a school library. I'd love to see more of this. We'll definitely have to create a whole section here at the Citadel that has a Bitcoin section so that people can get informed about BTC. But one more white pill story. And this is just highlighting again how different provinces are beginning to open up. Understand that most of these still all have like deadlines in the future where they're going to open up, which is less than ideal. But at this point in time, when you're either dealing with a prime minister, most of the time won't come out of hiding. And when he does, it's only to call people racist. This does seem like incremental progress in the right direction. Provinces to relax COVID-19 restrictions say risk assessment lies with citizens. Probably like it always should have. Saskatchewan and Quebec announced plans to lift COVID-19 restrictions Tuesday, saying it will increasingly be up to citizens to assess the risk they face from the virus. Wow, it's almost like we're going to start treating it like the flu. Prince Edward Island also outlined plans to end most restrictions early in April, with Premier Dennis King cautioning that the loosening is not a declaration of victory. COVID is still with us, and it will be with us, he said. Yeah, thanks for finally getting the plot here, guys. But why wait until April? Again, if we were serious about combating this, we should have been focused on building out our infrastructure at the provincial level with our healthcare system. But we weren't. Everyone just wanted to put all their hopes and dreams into a single solution, and that solution was vaccines. So enough white pills. Let's share the meme of the day. And I shared this on my Instagram already. I absolutely love it, though. So essentially, it is 2030. Your investment's paid off. Your log cabin is done. Your guns are safe. All is well. And it's just got Anon sitting on the front of his wood cabin with a few gats on his wall, and no step on snake flag, and a beautiful scenery. Yeah, this is definitely some problems for profit Citadel vibes. This is definitely my goal with what I'm trying to do here with my Citadel. And again, reminder, if you guys want to learn more about it, if you want to participate, there's a link in the video description down below. I really encourage you to join our Discord, start participating with the community, and start to get to know some of the amazing people that are already participating in what I'm doing here, or are interested in eventually coming and participating. Again, this is a long-term commitment from me. As we shared on the White Pill special last Friday, there's other people doing similar movements, but honestly, I think that my movement right now is the easiest one to participate in, where you can either literally come and join and live on the grounds, or alternatively, you can buy a nearby property. And I made sure that the land around here was very affordable. That was one of the criteria when I was trying to figure this out, where exactly to locate it. We're literally pretty much in the center of Canada. So, we're like 30-hour drive or 30 and change from the East Coast, 30-hour and change from the West Coast. And, just beautiful scenery and nature everywhere. On Boxing Day, I literally saw lynx just walking across the lake. and just doing his thing. Next day went out, followed his tracks, but didn't see any further signs of him. But yeah, that's it for tonight's Maple Bill. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you're enjoying the series of videos. If you are, please remember sharing is caring. So whether you're sharing it on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, or anywhere else that you play around on social media, it really is appreciated because the algorithm is doing me no favors. But again, it's not about me trying to go viral on these posts. This isn't about stoking my ego. I'm literally just trying to create more common knowledge amongst Canadians that, hey, you know what? You're not crazy. You're not alone. It's okay for you to want to figure out what's actually going on. It's okay to want to actually understand what is the truth, what's the narrative from the mainstream media. And, you know, again, a lot of us, I think, are being gaslit by mainstream media and a lot of normies. They're like, oh, no, mainstream media is not dying. It's not just a propaganda wing of the institution, the cathedral, the administration, and all that jazz. The World Economic Forum isn't really a thing, or it's only a good thing. Bill Gates only has your best interest at heart. No, it's worth doing your own due diligence on these things, guys, and I really encourage you to do so. So again, don't let this show be the end of your research journey or your rabbit hole. Let this just be a springboard. I love it when you guys share your perspectives in the comment section. Love it when you guys share different story ideas or information on the Maple Pill channel in the Problems for Profits Discord. So again, really appreciate everyone that's participating. And again, just thank you to all the Canadian truckers and all the protesters that are standing up for individual rights, freedom, and sovereignty, because I have no doubt that if we weren't doing this, again, I'm using the global we or the universal we, because I don't think I've played any real part in it. But if we weren't all speaking out, if we weren't trying to let others know that we're not okay with what's going on, I believe that our politicians would just be continuing course as normal. I believe that, you know, the police, the administration, that they'd all be happy just continuing down the same path, because what they want to do is just avoid any risk. But life is inherently risky. And while you can focus on minimizing your individual risk, that should be an individual decision and not something dictated to you by the state. I really appreciate those of you that are participating in whatever way possible. Let's quickly jump into the chat quickly here. And again, appreciate you guys. What do we got going on? Oh, we got a decent number. So we got Hungarian Experiment, we got Kyle, 22 caliber mind in a 357 world, laugh my ass off. I thought that was really good. And I don't know if you guys saw, but the one dude to his right or on the left of the screen literally cracked a smile and was trying to hold it back. And that only made my day more. Aislinn says, hey, everyone. We got Benoit. He's a hypocrite. I'm not even sure who you're talking about, but it's probably a politician. And I 100% agree with that. They're pretty much all hypocrites, other than maybe Ron Paul. Our medical professionals have been lacking for years. Yeah, and again, it's not just the medical professionals. It's our healthcare system. It's everything, right? And again, it's also just the unwillingness or the inability for medical professionals to sometimes shoot hard facts at people, right? Like, hey, maybe you should lose some pounds. Maybe you should try and get your BMI within a healthy range. Maybe if you started exercising a little bit more, stop drinking quite so much, or all sorts of other things that you can proactively do to improve your health, we'd probably all be better off for it. Not only you, the individual, but us as a society, right? Because we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And whether you like it or not, the people you spend time with, they are influencing you. RM says, thank you, Matt, for helping against this tyrant, Trudeau. Appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone else that's doing their part as well. God bless the truckers. 100% agree, Uncle. How do we have 14 watching but only 6 likes? Agree with that, Abdul. Okay, that's some spam. The description of the Guardian is using for the protest reads like a copy-paste for how the left typically does their own protests. It's surprising what you learn from when you follow the money. Absolutely agree. It definitely feels like, you know, I can't help but think that, and I know I'm not the first one to point out this observation, but when Justin Trudeau's out there projecting on how everyone's racist and misogynist and this and that and the other, and you're like, wait, aren't you the dude that's literally done blackface more times than he could remember? Because, you know, you told us it was once and then it was twice and then it was 3 times. Aren't you also the guy that had some, you know, some issues at the private school that you taught, right? Potentially with some students and inappropriate relationships. Again, I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit hole of research on that stuff. But it is very fascinating how often people project their own malice, their own imperfections onto others, particularly those that are in the public limelight. Craig says there is massive protest in New York City involving police officers, firefighters, nurses, and doctors against the mandates. I heard them chant, fuck Trudeau, love it. Absolutely. Again, that was one of the stories I just didn't really feel I had time to cover, but I believe, was it the Brooklyn Bridge they shut down for a period of time, or there was a bridge in New York? And definitely New York's been one of the most tyrannical states in America, right? California and New York are neck and neck in that regards. But again, that's almost just par for the course here in Canada. And it's just unfortunate that all of us find ourselves in these situations. Kyle says he's a Windsorite. Rise Above Health says the mainstream media is biased. First time hearing about it. Yeah. But again, understand, like, I don't know about you guys, but growing up, I didn't think that they were a propaganda wing, right? Like when you watch CBC or CTV News, or I'm trying to think of what the London News used to be called before it became CTV News. But again, no one ever like sat me down and told me about, media bias, or about how the media is funded by the government and things of that nature. And I really think it does a disservice to everyone. Bite Hunter says, I heard GoFundMe was going to return the $9 million raised for trucker support. Yep. So we covered that on yesterday's video. So encourage you to go jump into that if you want to get better understanding. But essentially at first they said you had to request a refund. Then they had a huge backlash on social media. So then they're like, yeah, you know what? We'll just automatically refund the money. But again, understand that as we discussed in yesterday's video, the Ron Paul Institute had an article on the NAG's head. Essentially, the NAG head is this idea of like, we'll fundraise for your right-wing cause here on a left-wing platform, but we'll pretend to be unbiased, but then we'll freeze the money, or we'll, force a refund. But there's a 7 to 10 day turnaround where you may take 7 to 10 days to actually get your money back. And this can not only like impact, say, the trucker protest, but like Kyle Rittenhouse, right? His defense raising when he was on trial, and a lot of other right-wing oriented movements. So again, that NAG's head is worthwhile studying if you guys are unfamiliar with it. Nick Johnson, a great show, informative, and a great starting point. Glad you guys enjoyed the breakdown of Justin Trudeau's crisis decision matrix tree or whatever. We have declassified intelligence, but that declassified intelligence is what I say now is the press briefing. Laugh out loud. What? Yeah, it's just literally the circular logic. And you can see like both the speaker's frustration at actually being called out on his BS, but I can't help but feel he was also kind of smirking at the situation he was in. Because this literally feels like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. This feels like cabal not going to fall, right? And all those other crazy things that we've been lied to by our government. And I should do a special episode on just some of the lies that U.S. government's told us over the years, but it would have to just be an indefinite show where I would just have to talk for like years straight. Kyle says, if you don't believe me, you're a Russian Putin lover. Yep, that's pretty much the equivalent of a Justin Trudeau. You're a racist, right? If you don't trust me, you're a racist. If you don't think that we should go kill Russians, then you're a Russian sympathizer. Maybe I just don't want war for no reason. Or maybe I think that this can be solved without war. Maybe we should actually just keep our promises that NATO made multiple times in regards to not continuing to move into the Russian sphere of influence. Again, I'm not saying that those are perfect solutions or that we still wouldn't find ourselves at an impasse with Russia, but I think it's disingenuous to simply to act as if we're the absolute good guys all the time and they're absolutely the bad guys. It's quite possible that both sides are bad guys, and that maybe one side's maybe a little bit less bad than the other some of the times, and the other side's maybe a little bit less bad some of the other times. Again, I'm not saying that I want Putin to be my leader here in Canada. I'm not saying that I want the Russian form of democracy by any stretch of the imagination, but it also feels just disingenuous to act as if Russia just literally wants to cause a hot war in the Ukraine. Cindy says, I absolutely love your show, but it really bothers me when you use God's name that way. Just FYI, other words do not offend. Again, thank you for your contextual take on what is going on, and I totally agree. RE reporter calling out. Appreciate it, Cindy. I'm definitely not going to be censoring myself, but I can respect your position and opinion on that. Again, love my freedom of speech. So, yeah. Rise above. Politicians only do what is politically expedient. It's in the title. Yeah, that's a good point. Kyle says, you are too black-pilled on Pierre, in my opinion. He's getting the boot from CPC if Toole was still leader. Yeah, quite possible, but I personally think that he wouldn't have wanted to endanger his political position, and so I don't think he would have put himself in a situation to get kicked out. And so I think that he was waiting until it was expedient. But again, I appreciate you, Kyle, sharing your opinion. I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right, but just kind of explaining my thought process. Purple Wave, my dude. I would love to see a purple wave. Again, I don't want to put all my faith in any individual politician outside of Ron Paul or any political party, because, again, I think that they all can be co-opted. Most individuals that are drawn to that, at least historically in the past, they're more drawn to the power than anything else. But again, maybe I'm just a little too black-pilled on politicians. Project LB52, stacks that, 100% agree. Laugh out loud, race is not an actual biological fact. We literally have various classifications for different varieties of animals within the same species based on where they developed in the world. Beth, I haven't checked your note yet. I did see the DM come in, but it looked like I wanted to do some research in regards to it. It sounds interesting to me. If I understand correctly, essentially, if the internet goes down, you're proposing that we can continue to have information and participate via radio. I think that I once upon a time came across something like that, but yeah, I really appreciate the DM, and I will spend some time checking it out in the future. Good Lord, these privileges are making me puke. Yeah, and we are literally going backwards. That's honestly one of my biggest concerns, is that how long until, with critical race theory and the desire to break people into different groups and subgroups, that you're going to end up almost having purity tests, right? Do you get to identify as a person of color or a visible minority, and do they need to understand your racial tree? Is someone like Logic, right? The rapper Logic, he often gets shit on for pretending to be black, even though his father was black. Again, you guys can do your own research on that, but he appears very white, I think, to the average person, and that's why he originally got so much flack in the rap community. But again, where do you draw that line, and how do you make that distinction? And, he claims that he experienced it from both sides of the aisle, right? That, he experienced racism on behalf of white people as well as black people because of his kind of in-between state. So again, it's just weird. Maybe I'm too naive and simply thinking that we can just approach things colorblindness. The idea of inherent bias, right, and things of that nature. Personally, if I had to try and give a relatively short but nuanced explanation or opinion on that, I would say that I think that less likely in race and more likely in cultural biases, right? I think that people inherently have a cultural bias to like people that are like them. But again, I think that holds true for if you're left-wing or right-wing in your politics, right? If you're liberal or conservative, you're probably willing to give your side a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt. Same with if you grew up in a Roman Catholic household, or if you grew up in a Protestant household, or if you grew up in a Muslim household. For me, again, to me, it was never about race, and it's always a little bit more about culture, right? Do we view the world in a similar way? Are we in alignment on certain issues, right? And there's certain foundational issues that are just a core part of my character. Individual freedom, individual sovereignty, the idea of meritocracy. If you completely disagree with all those things and you believe that, any sacrifice is justified in order for the greater good, we're going to be at loggerheads regardless of your race or religion, because our entire moral and ethical interpretation of reality is substantially different. But yeah. Rise above pro tip from CRT people: think about race every waking moment. That's the most concerning thing, is that when I've seen it go down the worst forms of it, right? And again, there's a lot of CRT that on the surface seems relatively harmless at first pass, but when you see it taken to the extreme, and arguably anything and everything when it's taken to the extreme will be extreme and usually bad, outside of maybe individual freedom. But yeah, it certainly seems like a lot of things they want to view purely through a racial lens. And I'm just not sure I just really have my doubts that that's in the best interest of anyone, and particularly in the best interest of grade 2 and grade 3s to be indoctrinated with this. I'd much rather the education system literally just focus on trying to teach kids how to read, how to write. Let's get some of those things focused and, done accurately before we worry about all this other crazy shit about gender studies, about teaching them sexual ed, about teaching them critical race theory. Can we just get them all capable of reading? If you can teach someone to read, then they can go out and consume information and make their own informed decisions. this idea that, no, we're just going to dictate to you what you should believe in, right? The same way that, like, you know, when I look back on history classes that I took in high school and stuff like that, yeah, there was definitely a bias towards the British, right, in regards to how a lot of things were presented. But because I was capable of reading, I was able to go out and consume additional information and come to my own conclusions in that regards. I can remember literally in, I think it was like civics or law class, you know, I was on the side of, essentially we had like a class debate where it was like the world, the different like countries of the world, and I was on the pro-Iraq side. It was like, I think randomly assigned, or maybe I chose to be on the harder side to be, but I believe it was just randomly assigned, and I was like kind of pro-Iraq, and, you know, like no one else like prepared for it, the debate in any way or the discussion. So like I was able to bring up all sorts of things like, hey, Canada, you've got a really small population, but you're one of the largest arms dealer in the world. Should you really be, you know, shitting on us about how we handle our country in Iraq and things of that nature? Yeah, I'm not making out Saddam Hussein to be a saint or anything like that. But again, those of us that actually get taught to read and get a spark or a hunger for truth and authenticity, you know, we'll go consume tons of information, right? Like I talked about this last night, but I started reading the Franklin cover-up. And if you think that like child sex cabals and all that stuff is complete bullshit, maybe you should go read that book and understand what's going down, because there's definitely, we live in a much crazier world than I think most of us realize. Anyways, I just realized how late I've gone. I really appreciate you guys participating in the chat. As always, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you hate watching this on YouTube or Facebook, reminder, I am uploading these videos now to BitChute as well as Rumble right after the recording, as soon as I download, do all that jazz. We're also out on Spotify. We're probably a few episodes behind on Spotify, so hang in there, kitty. We'll eventually get the shit up on Spotify. Although it seemed a lot cooler to be on Spotify before Joe Rogan and Spotify, like, you know, memory hold over 110 episodes, but is what it is. And at least we'll be there for those of you that mainly just want to listen. Again, appreciate you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with another dose of the Maple Pill. Thanks, guys.